funded my brother's entire dream wedding. He seated me at the back, kept my name out of every toast, and smiled the whole time. Then the wedding planner said something she shouldn't have, and I found out what he'd actually done with the money. I want to start with the table number because the table number is where this story really begins, even though I didn't know it at the time. Table 19. If you have ever been to a wedding, and most of us have, you understand immediately what table 19 means. It is not a number. It is the location in the social geography of the event. It is the table by the kitchen door, the one that catches the draft every time a server comes through, the one farthest from the dance floor, the one where the guests of obligation go to sit with other guests of obligation and make polite conversation about how they know the couple while the people who actually matter to the couple sit in the warm center of the room with full glasses and easy laughter. Table 19 is where you put the distant cousins, the college acquaintances who couldn't be cut without awkwardness, the coworkers who had to be invited but won't be missed. My brother Kyle seated me at table 19. My brother Kyle, whose wedding I had funded to the tune of $22,000. $22,000, table 19, and a seat next to a man named Gerald who sold insurance in a state I had never visited and who spent the entire first course telling me about a fishing trip he'd taken in 2019. I want you to hold all of those details simultaneously, because they are the complete picture of where I was sitting on the evening that ended up changing my understanding of my brother, my family, and the specific architecture of how I had been used. I need to tell you about Kyle before I tell you about the wedding, because Kyle is one of those people who requires context. Not because he's complicated. I used to think he was complicated and I now understand he is actually quite simple. But because the way he operates is so smoothly maintained that without context it looks like charm, and I want you to see it clearly. Kyle is 34, 2 years younger than me. He has always been, in the parlance of our particular family, the one with the gift for people. He walks into rooms and they reorganize themselves around him, not because he's especially funny or especially deep, but because he has a quality of attention that makes whoever he's talking to feel, in the moment, like the most important person available. He asks the right questions. He remembers the details. He follows up. These are good qualities in a person, and for a long time I thought they were the whole of him. I thought the warmth was the substance. It took me a long time to understand that the warmth was the method. He had been with his fiancée Cassandra for 4 years when they got engaged. Cassandra is a woman of very clear preferences who communicates them with the particular confidence of someone who has never had to wonder whether her preferences would be accommodated. She is not without appeal. She is intelligent. She is competent. She is organized in the way that people who plan events for a living tend to be organized. She had, from the beginning of her relationship with Kyle, a vision for how her life was going to look, and Kyle, who is very good at giving people what they need to feel close to him, reflected that vision back at her with enough precision that she believed, I think sincerely, that they wanted the same things. What Cassandra wanted was a wedding. Specifically, a wedding at a vineyard venue 2 states away, for 140 guests, with a florist whose work she had been following on social media for 3 years and a photographer whose packages started at $8,000. She had a Pinterest board. She had been curating it for longer than she had known my brother. Kyle called me 14 months before the wedding. The call came on a Sunday evening in the particular tone he uses when he needs something, warmer than usual, more careful, with a quality of deliberateness that I recognize now but did not recognize then as a signal. He said he needed to talk to me about something important. He said he knew it was a big ask. He said he wouldn't ask if there were any other way. The situation, as he explained it, was this. The wedding they wanted was real and the money to fund it was not. He and Cassandra were covering what they could, which he put at around $15,000. His in-laws-to-be were contributing $10,000. Their mutual savings were going toward a down payment on a house they had been trying to buy for 2 years and they didn't want to drain it. There was a gap, he said, a significant gap, and he was asking, not demanding, not assuming, asking, if I was in a position to help bridge it. He said a number. I said it back to him to make sure I had heard correctly. He said yes, that was the number, and that he understood if it wasn't possible, and that he would never ask if he didn't trust me completely, and that he wanted me to know that whatever I could do would be something he and Cassandra would never forget. I want to tell you I thought about it carefully. I did think about it, but I also want to be honest that the thinking was not as careful as it should have been, because the thinking was being conducted by someone who loved her brother and who had spent a lifetime in the habit of being available to him in the ways he needed. I had the money. I had been saving conscientiously for years, and I had reached a point of stability that meant I could absorb this without material hardship, even if not without consequence. I said yes. He said he would never forget it. I should have written that down. I should have written all of it down. The 14 months between the call and the wedding were a slow accumulation of small things that I was not, in the moment, adding up correctly. In the first weeks after I transferred the money, I was included. There was a group text, a few calls, a conversation about colors and flowers, and the seating chart in which my input was solicited and seemed genuinely valued. I met with Kyle and Cassandra for dinner twice, and both times felt like a member of the inner circle, someone whose contribution had bought me a place in the architecture of the day. I assumed I would be in the wedding party. Kyle had been in mine 6 years prior, had stood beside my husband at the altar and given a toast that had made the room laugh and then made the room cry, and had been, by every measure, exactly the brother I needed him to be that day. The first thing I noticed was that the wedding party conversation never happened. I kept waiting for it, and it kept not coming up, and when I finally raised it, gently, casually, in the context of, I imagine you're figuring out the wedding party lineup, Kyle said they were keeping it small. Just closest friends. He said it with the ease that he brings to things he has already decided and doesn't want to discuss. And I heard something underneath it, but I set it aside because I didn't want to be the person who funded the wedding and then made demands about her role in it. That felt ungracious. So I was gracious and I said nothing. The second thing was the planning group text. It gradually, over several months, became less active. Then reorganized somehow. I realized later there was a second planning thread I wasn't on, which I discovered by accident when Cassandra mentioned a decision that had been made in what she called the main chat, and the decision had not appeared in the thread I was on. I noted it. I said nothing. The third thing was the rehearsal dinner. There was one. I was not invited. I found out about it the way you find out about the things you've been excluded from in the social media era, which is to say, I found out from photographs. Cassandra's sister posted 3 pictures from a beautiful dinner at an Italian restaurant the evening before the wedding. Kyle was there, grinning. Cassandra's family was there. A collection of their close friends was there. I was not there, and I had not been told there was a dinner, and I had been in the same city as that dinner. I had driven down the day before specifically to be there for the wedding weekend, and no one had said a word. I texted Kyle that evening. I said I hadn't known about the rehearsal dinner and asked if I'd missed something on the invite. He responded 40 minutes later with, "Oh, it was just family and the wedding party." Kept it really small. So sorry, should have been clearer. Then a heart emoji. I put my phone down and looked at the wall of my hotel room for a while. Then I put on something comfortable and I ordered room service, and I thought about the $22,000 and I thought about the heart emoji and I thought about what I was going to do with both of those things. I decided I was going to go to the wedding. I was going to be present and composed, and I was going to see what the day actually was before I decided anything. The next morning I put on the dress I had bought specifically for this weekend, and I drove to the vineyard and I found my name on the seating chart. Table 19. The ceremony was beautiful. I want to say that clearly and honestly because it was, and the beauty of it was part of what made the rest of it so specific in its difficulty. The vineyard was golden in the late afternoon light. The flowers were extraordinary. The florist Cassandra had followed for 3 years had delivered something genuinely remarkable. Walls of white and green that made the whole space feel like the inside of a garden. Kyle cried when Cassandra came down the aisle, which was real and which I watched from my seat 7 rows back on the groom's side and felt, despite everything, a flicker of the uncomplicated love I had for my brother before I had learned to complicate it. During the reception I did what you do when you are well-dressed and self-possessed and have decided to behave impeccably regardless of the circumstances. I introduced myself to the strangers at table 19, Gerald the insurance man and a couple from Cassandra's professional network and 2 friends of the couple who were visiting from overseas and who were actually genuinely interesting and with whom I had a conversation about architecture that I would have enjoyed under different circumstances. I ate the food, which was excellent. I drank 1 glass of wine slowly. I watched my brother work the room. I watched him move from table to table with the ease that was always his gift, crouching down to talk at people's level, squeezing shoulders, laughing. I watched Cassandra beside him doing the same thing with a different quality of precision, more like a person conducting an event than experiencing one. I watched both sets of parents at the head table and observed that my parents, who were seated near the center, had also not been given prominent roles but seemed either not to have noticed or to have decided not to mind. The toasts happened. Best man, maid of honor, father of the bride, father of the groom. My father, who said kind things about Kyle and welcoming things about Cassandra and nothing about me, which I had not expected him to do but which I noted in the same quiet ledger I'd been maintaining all evening. Kyle and Cassandra gave a joint thank you toast in which they named, individually and specifically, 7 or 8 people who had contributed to the wedding in various ways. The florist, the photographer, Cassandra's aunt who had made a specific table arrangement, a friend who had designed the invitations, her parents, his parents. My name was not in the toast. $22,000 and my name was not in the toast. I smiled. I applauded. I picked up my wine glass and I took a sip and I thought, with the cold methodical clarity that has always been my primary coping mechanism, I am going to need to understand what has actually happened here. The understanding came 40 minutes later, in a conversation I was not supposed to be part of. I had stepped outside for air. The vineyard had a patio off the main reception hall, strung with lights, looking out over the dark rows of vines, and I was standing there alone with my glass when I heard voices coming from around the corner of the building. Not arguing, talking normally the way people talk when they believe they're not being overheard. One voice I recognized as belonging to the wedding planner, a capable, slightly harried woman named Dawn who had been moving through the event with a headset and a clipboard all evening. The other voice I didn't know. I was not eavesdropping. I want to be clear that I had no intention of listening to their conversation and that I was there first. But I heard what I heard, and what I heard rearranged everything. Dawn was talking about the budget, about a conversation she had apparently had with Kyle several months prior, during the planning process in which the final numbers had come in and there had been, her phrase, a significant surplus relative to what had been collected from contributors. She said something about how Kyle had handled the surplus and the other voice asked what that meant and Dawn said something that I can now recite from memory because I have replayed it many times in my head in the months since. She said, between what he collected from his family contact and what the in-laws put in and what the couple had themselves, there ended up being about $38,000 more than we actually spent. He said to just close it out to the couple, which is normal. It was a bigger differential than I usually see when someone tells me the budget is tight, you know? Usually when people say they're stretched, they are. I stood on the other side of that corner with my wine glass and I did the math in my head the way accountants do math without a calculator in the space of about 8 seconds. Kyle had told me there was a gap. He had told me the gap was the number he'd asked me for. He had told me his in-laws were contributing 10 and he and Cassandra were contributing 15. He had given me a picture of a budget that required my contribution to be whole. But Dawn had just described a surplus of $35,000 to $38,000 over what was actually spent. If the in-laws had contributed 10 and Kyle and Cassandra had contributed 15 and I had contributed 22, the total collected was $47,000 before any other contributors. And the wedding, which was beautiful but not extravagant in the ways that truly expensive weddings are extravagant, had cost somewhere in the range of $40,000 to $45,000 based on the vendor caliber I could observe, which meant that there was no gap when Kyle called me. Or if there was a gap, it had already been covered before he picked up the phone. What the call to me had produced was not a wedding. It had produced a surplus, which had been directed to the couple, which was now sitting, presumably, in a joint account belonging to my brother and his new wife. I walked back inside. I found my seat at table 19. I sat down and I finished my wine with a steadiness that I am still privately proud of. Gerald, the insurance man, asked if I was all right and I said I was fine, just getting some air, and asked him to tell me more about the fishing trip. I stayed for another hour. I hugged Kyle at the end of the night. I hugged Cassandra. I said it was a beautiful wedding, which was true. I drove back to my hotel and I sat on the bed and I took out my phone and I opened my notes app and I started writing down everything Dawn had said, word for word, while it was still precise in my memory. Then I called my husband, who had not come to the wedding for reasons unrelated to any of this, and I told him what had happened. He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "What do you want to do?" I said I wasn't sure yet. He said, "Whatever you decide, I'm with you." I said I knew. It's one of the things I love most about him. What I decided took 3 weeks to fully form, because I wanted to be sure I was deciding from the right place and not from the hot, immediate place that makes decisions that feel good in the moment and cost more than intended later. I consulted an attorney. Not because I was certain I wanted to pursue legal action, but because I wanted to understand what my options actually were before I decided which ones I was interested in. The attorney, a direct and efficient woman named Sandra, told me that depending on how the money had been characterized, as a gift, as a loan, as a contribution to a shared purpose, there were different available remedies and different burdens. She said if I had any documentation of the framing of the request, any texts, any emails, anything in writing that established how Kyle had described the need for the money, that would matter. I said I had the texts. She said let her see them. The texts were not a smoking gun in the legal sense, but they were useful. Kyle had written, in a message I had saved, that the money was needed to cover the wedding costs, and that without contributions from family, the wedding they wanted wasn't going to be possible. He had also written separately that he would pay me back over time, a phrase that Sandra said was significant because it characterized the transaction as a loan rather than a gift, which changed the legal posture considerably. Sandra sent a formal letter to Kyle. It was measured and precise and laid out the characterization of the transaction, the representations that had been made, the evidence of a surplus, and a request for repayment of the amount that had been characterized as a loan and used in a manner inconsistent with the stated purpose. Kyle called me the day he received the letter. It was not the call I expected. I had expected anger, the indignant, how could you anger of someone who has been caught doing something and channels the exposure into offense. What I got instead was something quieter and, in its way, worse. He sounded tired. He said he didn't know I knew about the surplus. I said I did. He said things had gotten complicated with the finances and he'd thought he could sort it out before it became an issue. I said it had become an issue. He said he was sorry. I said I knew. There was a silence. Then he said, "Was it the table?" I said yes. I said it was the table and the rehearsal dinner and the toast and the table, and I said that if we were going to talk about the money, which we were, I needed him to understand that the money had never actually been the main thing and that the main thing was what the table said about how he saw me. He was quiet for a long time. Then he said, "I let Cassandra handle a lot of the event stuff. I should have paid more attention." I said that was probably true. It took another 4 months to fully settle, and I am not going to pretend it resolved cleanly or that my brother and I are now closer than we were before. We are not. What we are is more honest, which is a different and lesser thing than closeness but is in some ways more solid. He repaid the money in installments over 8 months, which Sandra's letter had structured into an agreement that we both signed. The repayment was real and consistent, and I will give him that. Cassandra and I have never discussed it directly. I have seen her twice at family events since the wedding. She is cordial in the way that people are cordial when they are managing a situation they would prefer not to have to manage. I am cordial back. I do not expect this to grow into something warmer, and I have made my peace with that. My parents know the broad shape of what happened. I told them enough for them to understand why my relationship with Kyle had changed in texture. Not because I wanted them to take sides, but because I was done with the family habit of maintaining performances that required everyone to pretend they couldn't see what they could clearly see. My mother said she wished I had said something sooner. I said I understood that, but that there had been a wedding in the way and I had been seated at table 19, and sometimes you need to wait until you have the full picture. Here is what I want to tell you if you are standing at the beginning of a version of this story, holding someone's ask and trying to decide whether to say yes. The ask is never only about money. This is the thing I wish someone had told me 14 months before a vineyard wedding in the golden afternoon light. When someone asks you to fund something significant, a wedding, a business, a crisis, a dream, they are also asking you a question about how they see you, whether they know it or not. They are asking, do I believe this person is someone I am in genuine partnership with? Or do I believe they are a resource I can access? The answer to that question is almost always visible if you look at the right things. The table they would seat you at, metaphorically, before you have given them anything. The way they talk about you when you're not in the room. Whether they would give you the same thing, if the positions were reversed, with the same completeness and without the same conditions. Look at the table before you write the check. Seriously, imagine yourself at that table. Imagine whether you would belong there. Because the table is the answer. The table is always the answer. And document everything. I cannot say this enough. The text that Kyle sent me about covering the costs and paying me back. Those texts were what transformed the situation from a painful personal experience into something recoverable. They were not strategic when I saved them. I saved them because I am a person who keeps things organized and saves things by habit. But they mattered. They are the reason I got the money back. They are the reason Sandra could write a letter that had weight behind it. Keep the records. Know what you're agreeing to. And if you find yourself at table 19, if you find yourself watching from the back of a room you paid for, applauding a toast that didn't include your name, being thanked by a stranger for being there when the people you came for have already turned away, take a breath, finish your wine, and be patient. Because there will be a patio. There will be a conversation around a corner. There will be a moment when the thing that was done becomes visible to you completely, and in that moment you are going to want to have your wits about you and your phone in your pocket and the habit of writing things down. Table 19 is not where the story ends. It is where it begins.